The night presses close. Shadows cling to the corners of every room, twisting, stretching, listening. Somewhere beyond the walls, a building breathes, groaning under the weight of its secrets. And here you are, reading, listening, stepping closer to a place most feared to look. Before we descend further, there is something I must ask. Stay with me. Subscribe. Follow the whispering corridors of memory and madness. Each story, each name, each forgotten soul deserves a witness. Your presence matters. Without it, the darkness swallows more than it should, and the echoes fade into silence. But if you stay, you bear witness. You become the archivist alongside me, the keeper of truths too terrible to forget. Tonight, we step into the shadows of Willard State Hospital. Its halls are empty to most eyes, but to the patient, the observer, the archivist, its voice is deafening. Its stories claw at the mind, whispering of experiments, lost souls, and the machinery of despair. And so, if you are ready, follow me, but remember, once you enter, the echoes may never let you leave. They say Willard Psychiatric Hospital never truly closes. Even after the state sealed its gates, even after the last patient was moved or buried, something in those halls stayed awake. Waiting. The approach road is barely there anymore. Broken asphalt swallowed by roots, cracked like old skin. Fog settles over the grounds as though it remembers. Willard isn't just abandoned. It's withheld. The main building rises from the mist like a punishment. Tall. Angular. No warm lights, no welcome. Just windows, hundreds of them, watching. Except most are dark, opaque, or covered from the inside. Curtains drawn, long after everyone left. The front doors are chained. But the wood around them isn't marked by weather. It's marked by fingers. Scratches, long ones. Not random, desperate. As though someone tried for hours, days, lifetimes, to get out. Nobody visits. Except people like me. The ones who read what shouldn't be read. The state files say Willard housed 54,000 souls in its lifetime. Only 1,900 of them ever checked out alive. The rest? They were filed away. Not in cemeteries. Not in reports. But in the walls themselves. Tonight I bring you the first box. Box 27B. Label reads, Admissions 1936 to 1942, unverified. Inside, no records. Just photographs. Faces cut out. November 9th, 1937. A young woman was delivered to Willard at 2:15 a.m. Her file contains no name. Just a term. Transfer unprocessed. 2 attendants signed her in. Both later declared insane within months. She wasn't violent. She wasn't screaming. She simply refused to speak, except one sentence, over and over, like a static signal. This is not where I was. Doctors thought she meant another institution. But one nurse, a night nurse named Harlow, reported something different. She wrote. She never asked where she was. She asked when? After admission, the woman was assigned to room 108. That room doesn't exist on any blueprint from 1937, or 1938, or ever. But I've seen the photograph. Room 108. Bare walls. Steel bed. One chair. In the corner, under peeling wallpaper, someone carved a phrase into the plaster. Not in nails. Not in tools. But by dragging bare bone across stone. It reads, I remember this place. But it didn't look like this. The corridors of Willard are endless. Even the blueprints don't make sense. Harlow wrote in her journal that the halls seemed to shift at night. Rooms she swore she'd locked would appear open the next morning. Windows that faced the courtyard would suddenly look into empty walls. I have her notes. Every page reeks of fear. Every entry ends the same way. I hear them whispering, even when I'm alone. The whispers, she claimed, were never words. Not exactly. A low hum. Fragments of sentences. A lullaby sung in voices she didn't recognize. And always, her name. She described it as if the building itself was alive. It fed on the patients, yes. But it also remembered them. And the memories it remembered were never their own. Later, Harlow reported that some patients claimed the walls themselves spoke. Not through pipes, not through intercoms, not through any device. But through vibrations. Through air. Through something beyond comprehension. She wrote one last note before she vanished. The hospital keeps the ones it likes. And tonight, I think I am one of them. I went to room 108 myself. Not as a doctor, not as a journalist. Just a man holding boxes, files, photographs. But standing in that corridor, I understood immediately. The air changes. The light bends. Even sound, my own footsteps, becomes foreign. The door was there. Steel, rusted, slightly ajar. Inside, the smell hit first. Old medicine, wet stone, and something metallic. Almost like memory bleeding from the walls. The bed was in the center, like a stage. A chair sat in the corner, facing nothing. And the plaster, the bone-deep scratches, was exactly where Harlow said. But now, in the dim light, new words appeared beneath the old ones. We never left. I spun around. No one there. But the whispers started. Low, urgent. Faint at first, like the wind through broken windows. Then louder, insistent. A chorus of voices. Patients. Nurses. Names I will never know. And then I saw it. The photograph. Pinned to the wall with rusted nails. The young woman. The one transferred in 1937. Her face blank yet smiling. And in her eyes, the reflection of the hallway behind me. Only it wasn't behind me. It was inside me. The locked wing. No one enters willingly, yet it calls. Harlow wrote about it in fragments that looked like they were scratched out of fear. Nurses spoke of a smell, rotten linen, old blood, and the faint, constant sound of wheels or footsteps echoing where no floor existed. Patients sometimes disappear there, not through doors, not through windows. They vanish. And the stories that follow are worse than death. I saw it. The wing is not just rooms and hallways. It moves. It shifts when you blink. At the end of one corridor, there's a door that leads nowhere, yet the screams come from behind it. At midnight, the hospital changes. The lights flicker, shadows stretch into impossible shapes. I heard it first in the east wing, laughter, high-pitched, childlike, not the laughter of joy, but of something hungry. Harlow noted in her last diary. The children are not here, but they play. The walls remember their games, and they never stop. I followed it down narrow corridors, past empty wards. The echoes guided me to the nursery, empty beds, toys scattered on the floor. The laughter grew louder. And then, the toys moved, not by wind, not by hands, they moved as if alive. In the corner, a rocking horse swayed slowly back and forth, even though no one touched it. On its seat, a note was carved into the wood. You are next. The walls of Willard are not silent. They remember everything. Every scream, every whispered confession, every step taken in fear is etched into the peeling paint and crumbling plaster. As I walked down Ward C that night, my boots echoing against the warped floorboards, I felt the building itself breathe around me. The fluorescent lights above flickered with a rhythm I could not follow, casting elongated shadows that danced along the walls like restless spirits. A whisper slithered through the corridor. Faint, almost polite, like a secret waiting for discovery. Don't, I froze. My flashlight trembled in my hands. The voice seemed to come from behind the walls themselves. I leaned closer, pressing my ear against the cracked plaster. The whispers multiplied, overlapping, forming sentences I could almost understand. "Stay here, watch, listen, no," and then laughter. Dry, brittle, like bones scraping each other. I recoiled. The sound chased me, wrapping around the corners and creeping along the floor. I reached room 17. The bed inside sagged unnaturally, as if someone had just risen from it. The ceiling above shifted. My heart pounded in my ears. A reflection in the broken mirror revealed a figure standing behind me. I spun around. Empty. Just empty walls and a window that had been boarded for decades. Yet the presence lingered, heavy, pressing, watching. The air grew colder, thicker, smelling of mildew and copper. I stumbled forward, my flashlight flickering again, revealing fragments of the past. Broken dolls, rusted wheelchairs, old medical charts with names hastily scribbled and erased. The walls themselves seemed alive, whispering their memories into my ears. They were waiting for someone like me to notice, to record, to remember. And I understood, with a chilling certainty, that the hospital had chosen me. The silent ward lived up to its name. Patients sat motionless, their eyes staring through the walls, through the floor, through me. They were not alive in the usual sense. They were vessels. Empty shells haunted by memories too horrific to speak. The nurses avoided this ward after dark, speaking in hushed tones of the ones who hear, the ones who remember too much. I walked among them, notebook trembling in my hands. Their eyes followed me without moving their heads. And then I realized the silence was not absence. It was presence. It pressed on me, an invisible weight that forced my knees to wobble. Whispered words invaded my mind, alien and intimate at once, names, screams, pleas, fragmented memories of experiments, treatments, injections, electroshocks, and sensory deprivation tanks. I felt the pain, their terror, every stolen moment of humanity. A shadow flitted across the ceiling. My flashlight flickered and died. The darkness pressed against me. The air became viscous, and even my breathing seemed loud, obscene, intrusive. And then a hand brushed my shoulder. Cold. Wet. I spun. Empty room. Only the patients, their gaze drilling into me, knowing me as if they could see through my bones. The pen in my hand would not move. My thoughts were not mine. The ward had claimed them. I understood then that the hospital itself was a predator. Patient, patient, patient. Observing. Feeding. And now it had noticed me. I fled down the corridor, but every turn brought me face to face with the past. Broken beds, tattered journals, medical charts documenting human suffering as though it were scientific data. I could almost hear the doctors laughing, talking about progress and success as they erased lives in the name of research. The building was alive with their echoes, and it wanted me to listen. The doors of Willard are more than wood and metal. They are barriers. Barriers between sanity and madness, life and something darker. I found myself in the East Wing, where the locks were old iron, rusted through with age. Some doors were chained from the outside, heavy padlocks gleaming faintly in the light of my flashlight. The air smelled of disinfectant, decay, and something metallic. I tried the first door. Locked. The second? Locked. Behind each, I imagined screams, cries, voices that had been silenced for decades. And yet, a part of me hoped, foolishly, that inside I would find the remnants of human life. Evidence of survival. But survival was a joke here. Willard had long since claimed those who could not escape. I pressed my ear against the metal. A low hum vibrated through the door. At first, I thought it was pipes. the hospital's old machinery groaning under its own weight. But the hum became a chant, soft, rhythmic, human, but distorted, as if remembered through decades of suffering. "We are here, we are still here." I stumbled back, notebooks slipping from my hands, my pulse hammering in my ears. The walls seemed to pulse in response to the chant, breathing with me, aware of me. And then I saw it, a small keyhole, just big enough for a thin wire or perhaps a child's finger. I peered inside. Darkness. And yet, beyond the blackness, I felt eyes. Watching. Waiting. Not just observing, but judging. And then I understood. The rooms were never meant to be opened. They were meant to imprison memory itself. To hold echoes of suffering like sacred relics. I found the log in the old administration office. Papers scattered, yellowed, brittle, but still legible. The handwriting was meticulous, clinical. Dr. Weatherby, head of East Wing, had recorded every procedure, every patient, every reaction. Names crossed out, replaced by numbers. Observations, notes, instructions, and experiments. Experiments disguised as care. One entry caught my eye. Patient 47, sensory deprivation. Record responses. Duration, 72 hours. No external stimuli. Notes, patient begins to hallucinate. Verbal communication ceases. Observe for signs of memory loss. Expected, partial identity dissolution. I read on, each entry darker than the last. Electroshock sessions timed with precision. Experimental drugs, doses adjusted like recipes. Sleep deprivation. Isolation. Patients reduced to their reactions, nothing more, nothing less. And all of this sanctioned by the state, documented meticulously as if morality had never existed here. I felt a presence behind me, cold and patient. I turned. Nothing. But the air felt thicker, heavier, as if the hospital itself was breathing around me. You see. You see now. You know what we did. The words were not spoken, yet I heard them. And I knew that reading the log had marked me. Now I was part of the archive, part of the story, another witness. Another vessel of memory. Night in Willard is not silent. Even in the locked corridors, when the wind does not blow and the pipes cease their groan, there is a whisper. A whisper that seems to crawl along the walls, following you from room to room. At first, I thought it was the building settling, the old wood contracting in the cold. But then I realized the whisper was speaking. Names, dates, fragments of sentences long forgotten. I walked past room 12, where a patient had been held in solitary for decades. The whisper was louder here, almost urgent, like it was trying to escape. Don't forget, don't let them forget. I pressed my hand to the door. The wood was icy, and I felt a tremor beneath my fingers, as if the room itself was alive. My flashlight flickered. For a moment, I swore I saw a face pressed against the glass, eyes wide, pleading. Then it was gone. I turned a corner and the whisper followed, threading itself through the halls, climbing the stairs, echoing off the ceilings. I tried to speak, but my voice faltered. The words didn't belong to me. They belonged to the archive, to the hospital, to the dead. And in that moment, I understood something terrible. Willard remembers. It remembers everyone who ever suffered within its walls. It remembers and it waits. I found the ward that had been erased from every official map. Blocky. The forgotten ward. The hallway smelled of mildew and something sweeter, something sickly. The doors were all ajar, as if inviting me inside. Patients' beds were empty, sheets still rumpled, shoes left carelessly by the door. It was as if they had vanished mid-life, mid-nightmare. On the far wall, there were drawings. Childish sketches, crude lines, faces twisted in agony, words scrawled in desperation. They come at night, we can't sleep, The machines watch. I could feel the weight of those words pressing down on me, each one a memory trapped in the paint, in the scratches of the floor, in the air itself. And then I heard it, a low, uneven breathing. Not mine. Not anyone's I could see. It came from the end of the corridor. I followed it, heart pounding, each step echoing like a drum. At the far end, I found a small closet, door cracked open. Inside, a figure crouched. Thin, pale, eyes wide and unblinking. A patient who had survived, perhaps for decades, hidden from the world, forgotten by everyone but the hospital. And when it spoke, its voice was hollow, almost mechanical. They never leave. They never let us leave. The machines hummed. Not the ordinary hospital equipment, not the pumps and ventilators, but machines from another era. Electroshock chairs, their leather straps cracked and yellowed. Metal restraints that had once held screaming bodies now lay idle, yet somehow I could feel their intent. The air vibrated with memory, a pulse of past horrors that had never left these walls. I traced my fingers over the buttons and switches, as if touching the controls could make the screams return. And in a corner, there was a cabinet filled with vials and bottles, some labeled in faded ink, others unlabeled, their contents unknown. A faint chemical smell lingered. I knew that these substances had been administered in the name of treatment, of research, of secrets. The line between care and cruelty had long been erased. And then a voice. Soft. Patient. Insistent. They watch. They measure. They know when we think too much. I turned, but the hallway was empty. The machines hummed louder. The air thickened, pressing against my chest, and I realized that the hospital itself was alive. Not in the sense of architecture, but in memory, in intent. It had learned from every patient, every scream, every whispered confession left behind in the night. I found the locked cell by accident. A single keyhole in a solid steel door, untouched for decades. It didn't matter that I didn't have the key. The lock gave way to my persistence, or perhaps it allowed me passage willingly, as if the building itself wanted me to see. Inside, the room was small. A cot, a bucket, a barred window too high to look through. Nothing remarkable, except for the shadows. They moved not with the light, but against it. In the center of the floor, a journal lay. The pages brittle, yellowed. Written in careful, looping script, the words were chilling. They spoke of experiments, of doses and sensory deprivation, of nights without end and voices that never ceased. The author, long forgotten, had catalogued not just the horrors they endured but the transformation they saw in themselves. The slow erosion of mind and memory under the hospital's gaze. And in that silence, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Not mine. Not a patient's. Someone, or something, was moving through the corridor outside. I pressed my back against the wall. The cell seemed to close in, as if anticipating the intruder. My flashlight trembled in my hand, the beam catching something on the far wall. A handprint, smeared, not wet, not dry, just present. Watching me. Waiting. The corridor stretched endlessly, though the map of Willard I had studied said otherwise. The walls pulsed, not with light, but with memory. Voices whispered just beyond comprehension, patients, nurses, doctors, all trapped in loops of confession and accusation. I walked slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat announcing my trespass. A door toward 7 hung ajar. I hesitated. The ward had been sealed for decades, marked "Contagion, high risk," in peeling letters. Inside, the air was thick with dust and despair. Beds stood empty, but the sheets were folded with deliberate precision, as if someone, or something, still cared for them. And then, the whispering became clearer, almost human. "Do you remember us?" it asked. "Do you remember what they did?" I wanted to speak, to answer, but the words caught in my throat. My flashlight flickered, shadows dancing along the walls. Shapes moved behind the beds, figures draped in hospital gowns, faceless, reaching silently for the light. Each step forward felt like a descent, as if the floor itself pulled me into the stories buried here, stories that never ended, stories that wanted me to stay. In the center of the ward, a desk appeared. Out of place, polished, untouched by time. On it lay a single key, ornate brass, engraved with symbols I didn't recognize. My hand trembled as I reached for it. The instant I touched the metal, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the flashlight. Darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. I heard the lock click behind me. I wasn't alone. The key pulsed in my palm, as if alive. Something whispered in my ear, a language older than English, older than the hospital itself. It spoke of doors that should never be opened, of rooms where minds were erased and replaced, of experiments that stretched beyond morality. And then a memory. Mine or someone else's, I couldn't tell, of a patient screaming, restrained, begging for release. The sound became the heartbeat of the building. The key burned cold against my skin, a promise and a threat. I understood that this was not just a hospital. Willard was a sentinel, a keeper of knowledge too dangerous for the world outside. And now, with the key, I had been chosen to see everything. The key in my hand felt heavier now, as if it carried decades of fear and memory. I followed the main corridor upward, to a floor I didn't know existed. The peeling paint whispered beneath my fingertips, every wall a thin membrane separating the living from the dead. A single elevator stood at the end of the hall, doors rusted shut, buttons long since faded. The key vibrated in my palm, pulling me toward a set of double doors marked only with a fading symbol of an eye. Inside, the floor was different. The lights flickered, but the air was warmer, suffused with a quiet hum, like electricity through water. Patients, or shadows of patients, wandered the hallways, some walking backward, some repeating the same words endlessly. Remember, remember, remember. They didn't notice me. Or maybe they did, and I was simply too frightened to see. At the far end of the hall, a massive oak door loomed, chained and locked. The key in my hand pulsed, warm now, insistent. It fit perfectly. As I turned it, the chains fell away silently, but the air shifted, carrying a scent of antiseptic and rot. Beyond the door, the ward stretched into darkness. I could hear the faintest echo of voices, and I knew that whoever, or whatever, resided there, had been waiting for someone like me for decades. Inside the room, hundreds of files lay stacked, a labyrinth of paper, bound in leather, stamped with dates, names, and numbers. I picked one at random. A man, admitted in 1932, described as uncontrollable, prone to visions of other worlds. Another, 1947, resistant to therapy, highly suggestible. The registry continued, decade after decade, every name a life dissected, catalogued, experimented upon. I realized the whispers weren't ghosts. They were memories embedded in the building itself, each patient leaving fragments that lingered in the air, in the walls, in the keys. The registry was the heart of Willard, and I had unlocked it. Pages crumbled in my hands as I read, the ink smeared by time and tears, detailing experiments so cruel I wanted to look away, but couldn't. A sound made me freeze, a metallic click, subtle, deliberate. The shadows around the room shifted. The whispers became words. You're not supposed to be here. My heart hammered. Somewhere in the darkness, a figure moved, patient or warden, human or specter, I couldn't tell. And yet, despite the fear, I felt compelled to continue. The registry called to me, promising truths too dangerous to be forgotten, truths that had been buried for nearly a century. The hallway ended in a wall of brick, uneven, as if hastily sealed. The faint hum of the building's heart seemed louder here, vibrating through my bones. I pressed my hand against the bricks, and the key pulsed again, insistent, almost sentient. A section of the wall slid inward, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling down into the bowels of Willard. Darkness swallowed it whole, and a cold draft escaped, carrying a scent of mildew and something more metallic, more human. I descended, each step echoing in the void, until the staircase opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling stretched impossibly high, lined with pipes and flickering lights. Beds, hundreds of them, were arranged in tight rows. Some were empty, others held bodies, rigid and unnaturally still. And some moved. Not alive, not dead, but caught between. A patient whose eyes never blinked stared directly at me, then vanished when I blinked. My heart raced, the air thickened. The key burned in my pocket, urging me forward into the center of the ward, where a large desk sat, covered in files, instruments, and vials containing liquids that glowed faintly in the dim light. The files bore a name I had heard whispered in hushed tones throughout the hospital: Dr. Elias Harrow. He had been the director of this hidden ward, a man obsessed with control, experimentation, and the human mind's fragility. His handwriting was meticulous, cruelly precise, documenting every detail of every procedure. Notes about sensory deprivation, psychotropic trials, memory erasure. The more I read, the heavier the air became, like the room itself mourned the lives it had witnessed. One file caught my eye, labeled Subject 47, Initiation Complete. Inside were photographs. A young man strapped to a table, wires attached to his temples, pupils dilated to unnatural size. The annotations described an experiment in extracting fear, in converting terror into something usable. I realized then that Willard wasn't just a hospital. It was a machine, a living entity feeding on the minds it housed, consuming hope and sanity alike. And somewhere, in the shadows, Dr. Harrow's presence lingered, not alive, but encoded into the very walls, whispering, guiding, waiting. I closed the file with trembling hands. The key throbbed one last time, as if acknowledging the knowledge I now carried. Outside the hidden ward, the building seemed to breathe around me, the echoes of decades pressing against my chest. I knew the night was far from over, that Willard still had many secrets to reveal, and that I had stepped into a story that might never end. The corridors above me seemed to shift with every step, as if the building itself were alive, rearranging to trap or mislead. Faint whispers echoed through the plaster and brick, some urgent, some pleading, some incomprehensible. I pressed my ear against the wall, trying to catch words, but the sounds melted into one another, a chorus of the lost, trapped in limbo. My own heartbeat seemed deafening, pounding against my skull in rhythm with the murmurs. A door at the end of the hallway creaked open on its own. Beyond it was a room entirely lined with mirrors, each reflecting not my image, but moments from the hospital's past. Patients screaming, doctors observing with clinical detachment, nurses turning their heads, eyes hollow. One mirror shimmered differently, showing a shadow that moved independently. It beckoned. And when I stepped closer, the reflection of the key in my hand glowed, revealing an inscription I hadn't noticed before. To unlock the truth, you must face what cannot be unseen. Following the mirrored shadow, I descended further, reaching the isolation chambers. Rows of small, windowless rooms lined both sides, each door marked with a patient number, some scratched into the wood by trembling fingers. Inside, the air was thick, stale with fear. The walls had been coated with a substance that absorbed sound, leaving the rooms silent even when screams echoed in the mind. One door hung ajar, revealing a figure crouched in the corner. When it turned, I realized it wasn't a person but a reflection of a fear, a living hallucination shaped from the memories of past subjects. Its eyes, hollow voids, locked on me, and I felt an instinctive need to look away, yet I couldn't. The key burned hotter in my pocket, pulling me forward, deeper into the darkness. Beyond the corridor, I glimpsed an enormous steel door with no handle, just a small slot for the key. And as I approached, a voice, low and mechanical, seemed to whisper directly into my mind. "You have arrived. Now the ward awakens." The steel door groaned as if it had been waiting for centuries. The key in my pocket pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, almost alive, almost sentient. I slid it into the slot. The lock clicked, a sound louder than thunder in the dead silence of the underground corridors. The door swung open, revealing a vast chamber, darker than any darkness I had ever felt. Shadows pooled along the floor and climbed the walls, yet the air carried a hum, subtle, vibrating, like the memory of countless screams. Inside, rows of patient beds stretched endlessly, each occupied by figures that were not quite alive, not quite dead. Their eyes, wide and unblinking, followed me with a silent accusation. Their mouths moved, whispering fragments of confessions, pleas, and warnings, a chorus of lives erased by the hospital's experiments. I could feel them reaching for me, not physically, but mentally, pressing against the fragile walls of my mind. At the far end of the ward, a raised platform held a console of brass and glass, old dials and switches crawling with rust. Beside it stood a man, or what had once been a man, his lab coat shredded, eyes empty, yet staring straight through me. He raised a hand, and I realized the hum had intensified, vibrating through my bones. "You've come for the truth," he whispered, a voice both human and metallic. "The ward remembers everything." The floor beneath me seemed to breathe, the walls sighed, and I understood. This place was alive in memory, feeding on the horrors it had created. The whispering grew louder, forming words now clear enough to recognize. "We are all here. We are waiting. We are you." Near the console lay a leather-bound journal, edges frayed, pages yellowed. I opened it carefully, knowing some knowledge, once seen, could never be unlearned. The first page bore a single line, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They are not patients. They are data." The entries detailed methods that blurred science and cruelty. Drugs tested not for cure, but for obedience. Isolation extended for weeks, sometimes months, until reality itself fractured. Electrodes placed on skulls to map fear. Sleep deprivation, sensory manipulation, forced confessions, memories overwritten. And the numbers, oh, the numbers, they were meticulous. Each subject catalogued, their reactions measured like machines. But then the tone changed. Later entries grew frantic, almost remorseful. Mentions of voices in the corridors, figures moving without cause, patients who returned from isolation different, yet identical in ways impossible to describe. One note read, "I think the ward remembers me. It knows my name. It is watching, and it will not forgive me." I felt the air thicken around me. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift closer, reacting to my reading. A whisper from the journal's margins. "Do you hear it? It speaks." I realized the ward had recorded everything, not just in ink, not just in memory, but somehow in the very fabric of the building. It wasn't just a hospital. It was a living archive of human terror. And now, with the key in my hand, I had unlocked it. The hallways of Willard stretched farther than memory allowed. The walls pulsed with moisture and something older, something that had witnessed decades of despair. My footsteps echoed, but I knew the sound was not truly mine. Every step carried the weight of those who had walked these halls before me, those whose screams had been silenced by doors, drugs, and paperwork. The air smelled of antiseptic, rot, and iron, a mixture that made the stomach turn and the mind alert to danger. I reached the surgical wing, a place no visitor had been allowed for decades. The ceilings here were higher, the shadows darker, and the instruments left behind gleamed faintly in the pale light leaking through the high windows. Rusted scalpels, blackened syringes, and cracked glass jars filled with substances whose labels had long since dissolved into illegibility. I felt the weight of eyes on me. Not physical eyes, but the ward's attention, patient and patientless, waiting. Whispered names rolled along the walls. Some sounded familiar, some impossible to pronounce. I realized then that the hospital remembered every life that had passed through, even those erased from public records. At the end of the corridor, a room with a locked steel door radiated a cold, almost sentient. The key I carried pulsed in my pocket, almost urging me forward. When I finally turned it, the lock gave way with a shriek that vibrated through my chest. Inside, I found beds, not empty, but occupied by shadows. They weren't ghosts, not entirely, and not alive, not entirely either. They were echoes, fragments of memory fused with pain and fear, moving in the space between now and forever. Some tried to speak, their mouths forming words that I couldn't hear. Others pressed against invisible walls, as if trapped in time. And then I saw the center of the room. A metal chair with restraints, worn and blackened. An unfinished experiment. Instruments attached, wires coiled like serpents. A small recorder sat on a shelf nearby, blinking, recording, and waiting. I realized that the ward had been conducting experiments not just on the living, but on memory itself. Every scream, every hallucination, every broken mind had been folded into the building, making the hospital a vessel of collected suffering. And now, somehow, it had recognized me. I sat on the floor, my back pressed against the cold wall, and opened a notebook I had brought. Pen trembling, I began to write what I saw, what I felt. The walls of the room seemed to pulse with my own heartbeat, growing louder as I wrote. The shadows leaned closer, their forms stretching impossibly, limbs bending in ways that no human skeleton could endure. The whispers grew into sentences, sentences that seemed to skip around the room, forming stories I hadn't lived yet, histories of patients who had vanished without record. I was not just observing, I was being observed. The longer I stayed, the more the ward seemed to merge with my consciousness. Time slowed. Minutes stretched into hours. Shadows flickered with movement independent of any light. Voices whispered from the corners, sometimes close, sometimes impossibly far. "Why are you here?" A voice hissed, not malicious, not kind, just knowing. "You see what should never be seen." My chest tightened. Every memory I had seemed to warp, bleeding into the stories of the long-gone patients. I felt my own fears, my own thoughts, stripped and catalogued by the hospital as if I had been part of its records all along. A door in the corner I had not noticed creaked open. Beyond it was a spiral staircase leading downward. No light, no sound except the gentle, uneven breathing of the building itself. Something in me knew that what waited below was the core of the hospital's memory, the true archive of suffering, where the line between the living and the erased had been erased itself. I wanted to run, yet my feet moved forward, drawn by the inevitability of the ward's pull. Each step was a surrender, each breath a pact with the darkness that lived in these walls. I understood then, Willard was not a hospital. It was a collector of souls, a slow machine that took human pain and wove it into itself, stronger and older than steel, patient and precise. And now, in this moment, I had become a part of it. The archivist of the midnight corridors. The witness to decades of cruelty. And perhaps, the next entry in its endless ledger. The spiral staircase seemed endless. Every step groaned beneath my weight, but I could not stop. The shadows of the hospital followed me down, curling along the walls, whispering fragments of conversations I had never heard. Memories that did not belong to me. The air grew colder, thick with the scent of damp stone and rust. My flashlight flickered, and I realized then that the darkness was alive, breathing in rhythm with me, testing my resolve, learning my fears. At the bottom, the staircase opened onto a vast underground chamber, the ceiling lost in shadow. Pipes and wires snaked along the walls like veins. Old surgical tables, broken and scarred, lined the floor. And then I saw it, a massive ledger, carved from metal, embedded into the floor. Each page was a plate of steel, etched with names, dates, and cryptic notes. Patients, doctors, researchers, all recorded, some crossed out, some highlighted. The handwriting shifted before my eyes as if the ledger itself were alive, correcting and rewriting history. I stepped closer. The whispering intensified. Faces appeared in the shadows, pressing forward from every corner, their mouths moving silently, screaming silently. I felt a pull in my chest, as if my own story was being ripped from me, added to the ledger. My pen and notebook were useless here. Paper could not capture this. Memory could not contain this. Willard had become more than walls and halls. It had become a mind, a predator of thought and fear, cataloging everything, feeding on anyone who lingered too long. And then I understood the truth. This chamber had been the heart of the hospital's experiments. Here, not bodies, but consciousness had been dissected. Here, drugs, isolation, sensory deprivation, all aimed not at healing, but at extracting essence, breaking it down, and filing it away. And now I, the archivist, had arrived. A new entry, a new subject. I turned, realizing I was not alone. Hundreds of figures hovered around the edges of the chamber, some barely visible, some more solid, their eyes reflecting my flashlight like whetstones. They did not move, yet I felt their attention, heavy and patient. The whispers coalesced into words I could almost understand. Remember us, tell them, never forget. I felt the weight of every life erased in these walls pressing down on me, the cumulative sorrow of decades pooling in the chamber like stagnant water. One figure moved forward. A woman in a hospital gown, her face twisted in fear and sorrow. She extended a hand, trembling, beckoning me closer. I approached, compelled, and she whispered a name. A patient from the 1940s, one of the first to be experimented on with drugs that never should have been tested. She pressed something into my hand, a small, rusted key, warm as if alive. Unlock the last door, or be lost like us. The chamber seemed to shift around me. Walls warped, shadows merged. The air vibrated with a low hum, the sound of the hospital itself breathing, alive. I realized then that Willard had chosen me to witness it, to carry its story, to record the unrecordable. And yet, the more I saw, the more I feared that I would not leave whole. Every memory I had, every fragment of identity, felt like it was slipping into the ledger below, becoming part of the hospital's endless archive. I had a choice. Turn back and risk being swallowed by the shadows, my story lost forever. Or go forward, descending into the deepest chambers, into the heart of Willard itself, where secrets older than the hospital waited to be revealed. And as the whispers urged me onward, I realized there was no turning back. The key burned in my hand, small but impossibly heavy. I descended a narrow corridor that seemed to twist and elongate with every step. The walls pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat, and the whispers grew louder, urgent, almost frantic. Faces flickered in the corners of my vision, peering from behind pipes, from cracks in the walls, some crying silently, others staring blankly, waiting. The air was thick with the metallic scent of old blood and chemicals, the remnants of experiments that had warped human minds for decades. Finally, I reached a massive door, reinforced with steel, etched with symbols that were almost impossible to comprehend. The rusted key fit perfectly. It turned with a grinding groan, and the door swung open to reveal a chamber unlike anything I could have imagined. It was circular, endless, lit by a dim, unnatural light. On pedestals arranged around the room were glass cases, each containing a person, or what remained of them. Bodies preserved, some skeletal, some preserved in a near-living state, their eyes open, watching. And above them, suspended from the ceiling, wires and tubes attached to the walls, feeding into a strange, pulsating core at the center of the room. The hospital's true heart. I realized with horror that this was the culmination of decades of experimentation. Willard had not just housed the sick, it had collected them. The core was a machine, ancient and impossible, storing consciousness, memories, the essence of the lost. Every scream, every whispered plea, every experiment ever performed here had been funneled into this grotesque repository. And now, as I stood there, the machine seemed to sense me, its pulse quickening, lights flickering as if it recognized a new mind entering its domain. I felt it reach for me, tendrils of thought brushing against my own memories, pulling, probing. Faces, names, lives I had never known flooded my mind, threatening to consume me. The whispers turned into screams. "Stay, join us, remember." And then I understood, I was not here to escape. I was here to witness, to bear the burden, to record the stories of those who could no longer speak for themselves. I stumbled backward, the ledger of the lost clutched in my hands. Each page shimmered, names rearranging themselves, new entries appearing in real time. I understood now that the hospital was a living archive, and I was both chronicler and subject. Every word I had written, every note I had taken, was being absorbed into the pulse of the hospital. I was becoming part of it, my consciousness merging with the whispers of the lost, my fear feeding the core. Yet even as the darkness pressed in, a small sliver of defiance remained. I began to write, furiously, a record of everything I had seen. The ledger absorbed it immediately, integrating my words, yet I wrote anyway. Names, dates, stories, truths too terrible to be believed. And as I wrote, the machine pulsed more violently, shaking the chamber, a sound like thousands of hearts beating in unison. The figures in the glass cases turned toward me, their eyes hollow but attentive, as if acknowledging the final witness. Hours, or was it days, passed in a blur. Time had no meaning here. And then, finally, silence. The light dimmed to near nothing. The whispers ceased, leaving only the echo of my own heartbeat. I realized I could leave. The door was there, unguarded. But I hesitated. Outside, the world would never understand. Outside, my mind would be shattered by what it could not comprehend. I stepped back into the corridor, carrying the ledger, knowing the stories would survive even if I did not. Willard had claimed many, but not all. Some fragment of me remained intact, enough to carry the truth into the world, to tell what happened beneath the floors, in the heart of the most infamous hospital in New York. And as the doors closed behind me, I heard it, a faint whisper, almost a sigh, carrying both warning and invitation. "Return, we are always here, waiting." Willard State Hospital remains. Empty, decayed, silent to the untrained eye. But beneath its floors, its walls, its very foundations, the whispers persist. The lost are not gone. They are catalogued. They are remembered. And the archivist carries their burden, forever marked by what he has witnessed. The streets outside are quiet, indifferent to the horrors that lurk behind closed doors. Willard stands abandoned, a monument to human cruelty and human curiosity, yet alive in ways no one can see. Its heartbeat pulses beneath the cracked floors, in the walls, in the dark corners of rooms that no longer echo with laughter or cries. The ledger rests heavy in my hands, pages filled with names, dates, horrors, and whispered confessions. Every word I wrote there binds me to the hospital, yet also frees me, an impossible duality. The stories are saved. The lost are remembered. And I, the archivist, carry their burden, walking among the living with shadows stitched into my mind. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I hear the whispers again, faint but insistent. Return, do not forget, we are always here. I do not respond. I write. And in writing, the darkness is catalogued, contained, preserved. The world outside sleeps, unaware. But beneath the foundations of Willard, the forgotten still linger, waiting for the next witness to step inside and listen.